The gym smelled like sweat, leather, and regret. The kind that lingered in the walls, soaked into the floor mats, and hung in the air like the breath of 100 broken dreams. In the corner, the old Muay Thai trainer sat with a towel over his shoulder and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Scarred and tired, yet still watching everything with sharp, merciless eyes, he didn't like newcomers, especially not quiet ones who walked in with soft steps and soft eyes. But on that particular Monday, the gym door creaked open just past noon, and a man stepped in wearing a black hoodie and jeans that didn't quite belong there. He looked around with calm eyes, almost shy, like someone lost. But there was something else under the surface, something the trainer couldn't place. The young fighters in the gym barely noticed him, too busy hitting pads, throwing knees, and shouting as they tried to prove themselves louder than their pain. But the old trainer, Master Thanom, noticed everything. The stranger walked over and asked politely, "I was wondering if I could train here." His voice was soft, respectful, almost too respectful. Master Thanom narrowed his eyes and said, "You got experience?" The man hesitated. "A bit," he said quietly. Master Thanom didn't like the answer. He didn't like the stranger's voice, didn't like the way he stood, too calm, too relaxed, like someone who had nothing to prove and everything to hide. "This isn't a tourist gym," the old trainer said coldly. "We don't do autographs or teach people looking to sweat for selfies." "I understand," the man said, and bowed his head slightly. "I'm not here for pictures." That irritated Thanom even more. He had trained champions, broken egos, and shaped warriors out of street kids who had nothing but fists and fear. And now this man walked in with no gym bag, no gear, no attitude, just a calmness that felt unnatural. The trainer pointed at one of his young fighters, a hot-headed local named Dekai, whose kicks were fast and whose mouth was faster. "Spar with him," Thanom said. "No pads, no protection, just hands." The man looked at Dekai, then at the trainer, and nodded once. Dekai grinned wide, bouncing on his toes, already thinking about how easy this would be. "I'm gonna knock his head into the river." He laughed, stretching his neck from side to side. "Look at him, he's soft." The man removed his hoodie, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath, and quietly stepped into the ring. No warm-up, no wrapping his hands, no flashy moves. He just stood there with his hands down, shoulders relaxed, eyes soft. And that's when something changed in the room. It was small, almost nothing at first, just the way he breathed, or how still he stood, like a statue made of wind and fire. But it was enough for Master Thanom to lean forward slightly in his chair, eyes narrowing again. He had seen many fighters in his life, brawlers, champions, cocky kids, old warriors, but never someone who held silence like a sword. The bell rang, and Dekai rushed forward like a storm, fists flying in a wild, confident flurry. The stranger didn't move, not at first. He waited until the last moment, then tilted his head slightly to the side, letting the first punch miss by a breath. And then, with no warning, he stepped in, placed one palm gently on Dekai's chest, too gently, and pushed. Just a push. Dekai stumbled back 2 steps, confused, angry, throwing a kick out of pure instinct. The stranger ducked under it smoothly, turning with the motion like he was dancing through air. Then his hand shot forward, not to punch, not to hurt, but to stop, inches from Dekai's face. The whole gym fell silent. The punch never landed. But every fighter in the room felt it. It wasn't power, it was precision. Not violence, but control. Dekai froze, chest heaving, staring into the stranger's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see a soft man. He saw something else, something colder, older, and far more dangerous. Master Thanom stood up slowly, walking toward the ring without a word. The stranger lowered his hand and stepped back, bowing his head slightly again. "Thank you," he said softly. Thanom stared at him for a long time. "What's your name?" The man looked up and said, "Keanu." A few of the younger fighters started whispering, some giggled. One of them pulled out a phone and whispered, "He looks like that actor, John Wick." But Phantom didn't laugh. He had seen killers. And something about Keanu's calm eyes made his stomach twist in ways he hadn't felt since his war days. He nodded slowly, still watching the stranger. "You can train here, Keanu." Smiled gently. "Thank you." Later that day, when most of the fighters had left, Phantom approached him again. "You're not an actor," he said bluntly. Keanu didn't answer right away. He simply wiped down the ring, folded the towels, and helped sweep the floor like he had done it his whole life. "Does it matter?" Keanu asked quietly. Phantom looked into his eyes and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he nodded. "No, but it will." The gym lights flickered above, and somewhere outside, thunder rolled low in the clouds. Something was coming, and this man, this quiet man who moved like a ghost and struck like lightning, was not here by accident. Not in this forgotten gym, not in this broken corner of Bangkok, and certainly not with that name. What none of them knew was that 3 men in black suits had already entered the country, and they were asking questions about someone who looked like an actor, but wasn't acting at all, someone who had once walked away from the life, but the life hadn't walked away from him. Not yet, not ever. The rain fell gently outside, but inside the gym, the air felt heavier than before. Keanu stood alone by the heavy bag, his fists tapping the leather with quiet rhythm, slow and controlled. Like a man not training his body, but controlling a storm inside. Every movement he made was efficient, small, clean. Like he was sculpting silence from chaos. Master Phantom watched from the side, pretending to fix some raps, but his eyes never left the man. He had trained killers before, real ones, and none of them had Keanu's calm. They were always hiding rage, fear, desperation, but Keanu wasn't hiding anything, and that scared Phantom more. It was like watching a man who had already made peace with violence, a man who had bled and buried enough to be beyond anger. The gym door creaked open again, and 3 foreign men walked in. They didn't say a word at first, they just looked around, their black suits damp with rain. Eyes scanning, calculating. They looked wrong, too clean, too sharp for this part of the city. One of them approached the front desk and said in a flat voice, "We're looking for someone." Phantom turned around slowly, wiping his hands with a cloth. "Aren't we all?" he replied coldly. The man smiled slightly, but his eyes didn't. "About 6 feet tall," he said. Dark hair, lean build. He looked around again, pretending to admire the old gym posters on the wall. "Probably quiet," he added. "May seem harmless." Keanu stopped hitting the bag and reached for a towel. Not turning around, not making a sound. The men didn't see his face, but one of them tilted his head, sensing something. "You see anyone like that?" the man asked, now looking directly at Phantom. The trainer narrowed his eyes. "Lot of quiet people come here," he said. "Some want to fight, some want to forget." The man nodded slowly, almost politely, but the tone in his voice changed. "This one doesn't get to forget." In the back, Keanu walked toward the showers, still silent, his towel slung over his shoulder. He moved like a shadow, avoiding sunlight, natural, unforced, but alert. As he passed the lockers, his hand brushed the edge of one, and in that second, his eyes flicked to the mirror. He saw the man watching him through the glass, and the man saw him too. Keanu kept walking, but his breathing slowed. The man leaned toward his partner and whispered something. "That's him." They didn't rush, didn't shout, just walked toward the back like they owned the air they breathed. Phantom stepped in their way, slowly but firm. "He's a member," he said flatly. The men stopped, amused. "We just want to talk." One of them lied. Phantom looked at their shoes, at the bulges under their coats, at their eyes empty, trained, rehearsed. "You came a long way," he muttered, "but you won't like what you find." In the locker room, Keanu stood still, staring at his reflection. Water dripped from the broken shower head behind him, but he didn't move. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out something small, a dog tag, rusted and worn, with a name faded on it. His fingers ran over the metal, his eyes distant. A memory came back without warning. A small house in the mountains. A fireplace, a laugh, a woman with kind eyes and a puppy that never left his side. He had buried both years ago, one in a casket, one in the cold dirt with no stone. He put the dog tag away just as the door creaked open. "Keanu," one of the men said from the hallway. Or should I say, "Wick." Keanu turned slowly, calmly. Like someone waking up from a deep sleep. His eyes were empty now, not soft, not kind, just still. "You followed me a long way," he said softly. The man smiled. "Your past left a trail." Keanu stepped forward slightly. "Go home." The second man entered the room, hand already reaching inside his coat. "That's not an option," he said. "You owe the table." Keanu's jaw tightened just a little. "I paid my debt," he whispered. "They disagree," the man said, pulling a gun from under his coat. But before he could raise it, something unexpected happened. Master Thanum's old wooden stick slammed down on the man's wrist from behind. The weapon clattered to the floor, and the second man yelped in shock. Thanum stepped forward, face hard. "I said, he's a member." Keanu looked at him, not surprised, not grateful, just silent. The first man didn't flinch. He simply reached for his own weapon. But Keanu was faster. His hand moved like lightning, grabbing the gun mid-draw, twisting the man's wrist with a clean, painful snap, and pulling him forward into a steel locker with a sickening thud. The second man reached again, panicked, but Keanu kicked the gun away and swept his legs, dropping him hard. He didn't kill them, not yet. He just disarmed them, stood over them, and said quietly, "This was your warning." Thanum stood beside him, breathing a little heavier. "You're not who you said you were," he muttered. Keanu nodded. "I never said who I was." The trainer looked at the two men groaning on the floor. "They'll come again," he said. "I know," Keanu replied, wiping blood from his knuckles. "They always do." Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm hadn't. It had just moved inside, and now the old gym, this quiet corner of Bangkok, was no longer a place to train. It was a place where ghosts came looking for unfinished stories, and one of them had just remembered who he used to be. The bruises on Keanu's hands didn't matter. He sat in silence after the fight, at the edge of the ring, wrapping his knuckles again, even though they were already clean. He wasn't thinking about the men he had dropped. He was thinking about a promise made in the cold light of dawn, when blood had dried on his shirt and her voice had been the only sound keeping him sane. "You said you were done," she had whispered back then, her hand over his heart. "You promised." And he had promised, but promises were fragile things, and now, inside a dusty gym in the backstreets of Bangkok, the past had knocked again. And this time, it hadn't used the front door. Master Thanum sat across from him on an old wooden bench, sharpening a pair of training blades like it was just another Tuesday. But his eyes flicked to Keanu every few seconds, watching, reading, searching. "You didn't flinch," he said finally. Keanu didn't answer. "Not even when the gun came out," Thanum added. "You moved like a ghost that already knew the ending." Keanu finished wrapping his hand and looked up. "You said you trained killers," he said quietly. Thanum smirked. "I did." "Then you know why I didn't flinch," Keanu replied. The room went quiet again, except for the sound of a punching bag swinging slowly in the corner. A young boy was still in the gym, no older than 12, shadowboxing in silence, copying Keanu's movements from earlier that day. His name was Nong, a street kid who had slept in the alley out back for months, until Thanum took him in and gave him a mat to sleep on. Nong didn't speak much, but he watched everything, especially Keanu. He threw a sloppy right hook and nearly tripped over his own feet. Keanu stood up and walked over, kneeling beside him gently. "Turn your hip, not your foot," he said softly. "Keep your eyes up." Nong looked up at him, unsure at first, then nodded, trying again. This time smoother, cleaner. Keanu smiled. "Better," he said. It was a small moment, simple, quiet, but Thanum watched it like it was something sacred. Because men like Keanu didn't usually kneel for anyone. They didn't teach kids, didn't Speak softly, didn't smile, yet here he was, helping a broken boy in a broken gym find balance with a punch. You were a teacher once? Phantom asked. Keanu shook his head slowly. No, he said, but someone taught me. Who? Keanu's eyes dropped to the floor. A woman, he said. She showed me there was more to life than killing. Phantom leaned back, his voice gentler now. And you lost her? Keanu nodded once. To cancer. The silence after that felt deeper, heavier, like a truth no one could punch their way through. Phantom looked away, sighing. They won't stop, you know, he said. The men in suits. I know. Keanu said softly. They think I'm still theirs. Are you? Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he looked at his hands, the same hands that once held her face in peace, and now broke bones without blinking. He hated how natural it still felt. He hated that violence lived under his skin like a second pulse, and no matter how far he ran, the world always found a way to bleed again. They want something, Phantom said, but it's not just revenge. Keanu stood up, thinking, breathing deeply. It's the ledger, he muttered. What ledger? Keanu walked over to his locker and opened the bottom panel, pulling out an old, weathered notebook wrapped in tape. This, he said. It has names, contracts, blood debts, blacklists. Phantom's face darkened. You kept it? I didn't want to, Keanu said. But if it fell into the wrong hands, too many would die. Phantom stood, looking at the notebook like it was a bomb. Then why come here? He asked, why not burn it? Keanu looked out the window, where the night was swallowing the sky. Because this place used to be invisible, he said, and because I thought maybe I could disappear too. Phantom placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not invisible anymore. And outside, across the street, a black car sat under a flickering lamp. Inside, another man watched the gym, phone to his ear. He's here, he said. Confirmed. A voice on the other end replied coldly. We don't want him arrested. The man in the car smiled. I know, he said. We want him buried. The gym lights flickered once, and Keanu looked up instinctively. He didn't know when the attack would come, but he knew it would. Violence had a way of returning like a bad season, and when it did, he would not run. Not this time. Because for the first time in years, he had something worth protecting again. A gym full of forgotten kids. An old trainer with a code, and a piece he wasn't ready to lose. The gym had always been loud during the day. The echo of gloves against bags, the smack of pads, the yells of kids learning to fight their way through pain. But tonight, it was different. There was no shouting, no music, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Keanu sat in the far corner of the room, legs crossed, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. It looked like meditation. But it wasn't. It was memory. He could feel the weight of the ledger in his bag. Each name inked inside was a ghost, a contract signed in silence, a target, a debt, a decision. Many of them were dead. But some were still out there, and they were the ones paying for his return. He had thought by leaving that world, he could bury the book. But the truth was cruel. Nothing stayed buried unless someone died holding the shovel. He heard footsteps, light and cautious. He opened his eyes to see Nang, the boy, peeking around a pillar, holding 2 cups of water. You thirsty? The boy asked. Keanu smiled faintly and nodded. The boy walked over, handing him 1 cup and sitting beside him quietly. For a moment, they just sat in silence. You were fast yesterday, Nang said suddenly. Like movie fast. Keanu chuckled. Under his breath, you watch a lot of movies? Only old ones, the boy said. The good kind. With heroes. Keanu didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked up at the cracked ceiling and said, heroes bleed too, you know. Nang tilted his head. But they still protect people, right? Keanu looked at him and nodded slowly. They try. Outside the gym, a shadow moved along the rooftop across the street. Then another, and another. A small team, dressed in black, silent and fast. They weren't thugs or amateurs. They were trained military. Or worse, their orders weren't to talk, only to retrieve the ledger and eliminate the loose end. And tonight, they were the storm, moving closer with every heartbeat inside the gym. Master Phantom checked the locks a third time. Something didn't sit right in his bones. Years of experience had made him feel shifts in air before fists flew. And tonight, the air felt like glass about to shatter. He looked at Keanu, who had already stood up and was calmly packing his bag. "They're coming, aren't they?" The trainer asked. Keanu didn't look up. "Yes," he said. "And it won't be like before." Phantom opened a hidden drawer beneath the ring and pulled out 2 old wooden batons. They were cracked and worn, but still solid. "This place has had enough broken people," he said. "I won't let them break it again." The front door creaked. Slowly, a man walked in alone. Hands raised, no weapons visible. His face was familiar to Keanu, but blurred with time. Then the name hit him. "Like ice water, Marlowe," he said coldly. Marlowe had once been a tracker, a cleaner for the Continental. He was good, quiet, smooth, smart. But he had a habit of switching sides when the wind changed. "A survivor, not a loyalist. Long time," Marlowe said with a calm smile. Keanu's hand didn't leave the edge of his bag. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Marlowe replied. "But here we are. What do you want?" Phantom asked from behind the desk, eyes locked on the man. Marlowe smiled again, polite but poisoned. "This isn't personal," he said. "They just want the book. Give it to me, and I'll make sure no one else walks through that door." Keanu's voice was soft. "And what happens to the boy?" Marlowe's smile faded. "That depends on you." Keanu stepped forward, slowly. "You know I can't give it to you," Marlowe sighed, almost disappointed. "Then I suppose we do it the other way." And that's when the lights cut out. Complete blackness, then the sound, soft footfalls, window glass breaking. They were coming in from all sides. Keanu grabbed Nong and pushed him under the ring. "Don't come out no matter what you hear," he whispered. Phantom moved beside him, batons ready, body tense. "You sure you're not John Wick?" he asked, half serious, half breathless. Keanu's face didn't change. "I used to be." The first attacker dropped from the ceiling. Keanu caught him mid-air, slammed him into the mat, disarmed him, then struck his neck hard enough to make him drop silently. 2 more came from the rear entrance, fast, silent, blades drawn. Phantom met them like a ghost in the dark, spinning, blocking, striking. His wooden batons moved like wind, brutal and controlled. Keanu fought like he was sculpting the dark with motion. His hits were not wild. They were chosen, placed, like punctuation marks in a silent sentence of violence. More came in. They weren't stopping. Marlowe had sent more than a cleanup crew. This was an execution team. One of them spotted Nong under the ring and lunged. Keanu moved faster than thought, taking down the attacker with 3 quick strikes. The last one echoing like a drumbeat of finality. Blood was on the floor now, but Keanu didn't flinch. Not out of numbness, but because every second mattered, and he couldn't afford to hesitate. Not tonight. Marlowe stood at the doorway, untouched. "You're still fast," he said. "But this ends the same." Keanu walked toward him, step by step. The room behind him full of moans and broken weapons. Phantom leaning against a wall, bleeding but standing. "You can still walk away," Keanu said quietly. Marlowe shook his head. "You think you're the last good man in a world that forgot what good means." He pulled a gun from under his coat. "You're not," he said, and fired. The shot rang through the gym like thunder. Nong screamed. Phantom shouted, and Keanu fell. His shoulder burned with fire, but he didn't stop. He moved forward anyway. Tackled Marlowe to the floor, took the gun, and with one clean motion, disarmed him and held the barrel to Marlowe's forehead. Breathing hard, Marlowe closed his eyes. "Do it," he whispered. Keanu stared down at him, his hand trembling, his breath slow, and then he lowered the gun. "Not in front of the boy," he said. He tossed the weapon aside and stood over Marlowe. "Tell them," Keanu whispered. "Tell them I'm still not back," and he turned away, blood soaking his shirt, his body heavy, but his heart still holding. Because tonight he chose not to kill, and in this broken world, sometimes that was the only kind of victory left. The storm outside had moved on, but inside the gym, it had left behind broken glass, torn mats, and blood that refused to dry. Keanu sat on the floor near the locker room, shirt soaked through with blood, the bullet having torn through his shoulder, but missed anything fatal. Master Phantom crouched beside him, cleaning the wound with water and strips of gauze. He didn't speak, not because he was angry, but because he didn't know what to say to a man who bled like this and still stood like nothing happened. "You should have killed him," the trainer said finally, tying the bandage tight. Keanu winced but stayed still. "I've killed enough," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Phantom sat back, wiping his hands on his pants. "You didn't kill for sport," he said. "You killed to survive." Keanu looked at the ceiling, then at the mirror on the wall where his reflection stared back, tired, older, but still holding that same silent storm. "That's the problem," he said slowly. "I got too good at surviving." Across the room, Nong was sweeping the broken glass with careful, quiet movements, his small hands shaking each time he looked at the bloodstains. He wasn't used to death, not like Keanu was, and Keanu hated that the boy had to see this world for what it really was. Ugly, violent, without warning. "You're a good kid," Keanu said, walking over to him slowly. Nong looked up, startled, then smiled shyly. "I wasn't scared," he said. Keanu smiled back. "I know," the boy hesitated, then whispered, "Are they going to come again?" Keanu crouched beside him, his face calm but firm. "Yes," he said gently. "And when they do, you'll hide just like last time, okay?" Nong bit his lip. "But I want to help." Keanu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You help by living," he said softly, "not by fighting." Those words hung in the air like something sacred, because for all the violence Keanu knew, he also knew what it cost to let it live inside you. He wasn't protecting the gym with his fists. He was protecting it from becoming like him, a place where peace was always temporary, a face that never smiled fully. Later that night, when the gym had emptied, Keanu stood alone in the ring, barefoot, eyes closed, letting his breathing guide him through slow, careful movements. It wasn't a fight routine. It was more like a prayer, each movement a memory, each breath a name he couldn't forget. The sound of the ropes creaking broke his focus. He turned to see Phantom sitting in the corner, watching, a small bottle of rice whiskey in one hand, a second cup in the other. "You move like you're still haunted," the trainer said, pouring the drink. Keanu didn't answer. He just stepped out of the ring and took the cup. They sat in silence, sipping, two men from different worlds, but both broken in their own way. "You want to stay here?" Phantom asked suddenly. Keanu looked at him, confused. "In the gym?" "In Bangkok," the trainer said. "Make this place your home." Keanu looked around the cracked walls, the rusting pipes, the soft thump of a punching bag swaying in the wind. It wasn't beautiful, but it was real. "You think I can?" he asked. Phantom raised an eyebrow. "You saved a boy, took a bullet, and still trained the next day," he said. "You're more one of us than most people who live here." Keanu stared into his cup, watching the ripples. "What if I bring trouble?" Phantom leaned forward. "Then we fight together," he said. "And if we die, at least we die protecting something that matters." Keanu didn't say anything, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like walking away. He felt like staying the next morning. Keanu helped repair the broken windows. He taped the mats back together, fixed the water filter, and even taught the morning class how to throw proper elbows. Nong laughed when Keanu tripped over a skipping rope. Phantom actually smiled when Keanu fixed the old fuse box. For a few hours, it felt like peace was possible. And then, just before sunset, a package arrived, left on the doorstep, wrapped in black cloth, no return address. Phantom picked it up with caution, unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a single item. A silver coin, old and polished, and on one side, the emblem of the Continental. Keanu froze when he saw it. His face tightened. His fingers curled into fists again. Phantom looked at him and asked quietly, "What does it mean?" Keanu took the coin, closed his eyes, and whispered, "It means the high table knows where I am now." A silence filled the gym again. But this time, it wasn't quiet. It was loaded. A warning, a clock starting, a fuse burning. Keanu knew what came next wasn't survival. It was war, and this time, he wouldn't be able to run, not with Nang here. Not with Phantom beside him. Not with a gym full of people who believed in the peace he never had. His hands weren't ready, but his heart was. Night fell like a warning. The city outside never stopped moving, but inside the gym, everything had slowed to something almost sacred. Keanu sat alone in the ring, the lights off, just the pale moonlight spilling through the cracks in the roof. He was still, not resting, not meditating, but waiting, not for death. He had waited for that before. And it never scared him. What scared him now was something else. This place had given him something rare, a reason to stay, a boy who laughed, an old man who trusted, and a room full of strangers who didn't care who he used to be. But now the high table knew he was here, and the coin left at the door meant only one thing. A marker had been placed, not a contract, a summons. They weren't sending an army this time. They were sending someone worse. Someone from his past. Keanu stood up and walked to the locker room. He opened the bottom of his old duffel bag and pulled out what he had buried years ago. A black suit, carefully folded. A faded photograph tucked inside the lapel. A face that had once made him promise never to kill again. She was gone, but tonight, he wasn't breaking that promise. He was honoring it. He suited up slowly, with the movements of a man preparing not for a war, but for an ending. He strapped the holster to his side, placed the ledger in a fireproof pouch, and hid it in the back office behind a false wall. Then he sat down at the front of the gym, just outside the door, and waited. Phantom arrived not long after, carrying 2 cups of tea. He sat beside Keanu on the curb, both men watching the street in silence. "You didn't sleep," Phantom said. Keanu shook his head. "I can't afford to." "They'll come tonight?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yes." Phantom passed him a cup and looked up at the sky. "I used to believe warriors died alone," he said. "But maybe that's only true if they live alone too." Keanu glanced at him. "You're not going to stop me from going out there?" Phantom sipped his tea. "If I were 30 years younger, I'd go with you," he said. "But you and I both know I'd only slow you down." They both chuckled quietly, but behind their smiles was something heavier. Something final. Nang came to the door, holding a small note in his hand. "I drew this," he said shyly, passing it to Keanu. It was a sketch, simple, rough, but clear. 3 people standing together. A boy, an old man, and a tall figure in black. Keanu looked at it for a long time. Longer than he had looked at any photograph in years. "You're part of this now," Nang said. "So come back." Keanu knelt, his voice soft but steady. "I'll try," he said. "But if I don't, you will," Nang interrupted. "You always do." The boy ran back inside before his own tears could catch him. Keanu rose slowly, shoulders squared. The street was silent, too silent. He stepped into the middle of the road. No headlights, no voices, just the hum of a city pretending to sleep. And then they came, not many, just one car, sleek and dark. It stopped 50 feet away, and out stepped a woman. Keanu froze, his breath catching. She was tall, graceful, dressed in black, her face unreadable. But her eyes were familiar. "Sophie," he whispered. She had once been one of the best. Trained with him, fought beside him, bled for him. But she had stayed when he walked away, and now she was here. "The high table's blade? They sent you?" he asked. She nodded. "You broke the code," she said softly. "You hid the ledger. They want it back. And you?" Her voice faltered for a moment. I want to believe the man I knew is still alive. Keanu lowered his hands. Then, walk away, he said. Tell them I'm gone. She looked down. I can't. She whispered. They'll kill me, and then. Before he could respond, she drew her weapon. They moved like old shadows. The fight was elegant. Precise, not savage, but filled with emotion neither of them could speak. Blow for blow, they danced through the dark, their movements saying everything. Their words never could, but age, pain, and blood loss slowed Keanu just enough. And Sophia's blade cut deep. He dropped to his knees. Breathing hard, she stood over him, sword trembling in her hand. I didn't want this, she whispered. He looked up at her, calm. Then don't finish it. She stepped back. Her blade fell to the ground, and she turned away. Disappearing into the night, Keanu crawled to the edge of the street, the city lights fading in his vision. But he didn't die there. He woke up 2 days later in the gym, bandaged, broken, but alive. Nang was sleeping beside him, curled up like a cat. Phantom sat nearby, whittling a wooden stick. You lost, he said bluntly. Keanu smiled weakly. But I lived. Barely. They sat in silence for a while. The war hadn't ended, but something else had. Keanu's running, his guilt, his belief that he didn't deserve peace. He had bled for it, killed for it. But now he was willing to protect it without pulling the trigger. And that made all the difference. A few months later, the gym had grown fuller. Nang had started coaching the younger kids. Phantom finally fixed the roof. And Keanu stayed, not as John Wick, not as the ghost, but as a man, just a man, who had finally stopped running.